Most people don't realize how unusual Alaska actually is until they look at the basic facts. And if you skip those facts, it's almost impossible to understand why this place feels so different from anywhere else. So, first we'll walk through the key details that explain Alaska, and then we'll move into its most incredible places. And later on, you'll see a scene where nature and survival meet in a way that only happens here. When you break Alaska down into simple numbers, the scale becomes almost impossible to ignore. This state covers more than 1.7 million kilometers, which is nearly 663,000 square miles, bigger than California, Texas, and Montana combined. And here's the part people often miss. Despite that size, only about 730,000 people live here. That's fewer than many mid-sized American cities. If you spread the population evenly, each person would have more than 2 kilometers to themselves, about 0.8 square miles. But here's where it gets interesting. Alaska is not empty because it's remote. It's empty because it's difficult. Much of the land is shaped by permafrost, ice fields, and mountains that rise faster than roads can be built. And that leads to something most visitors don't expect. More than 80% of Alaska's communities aren't connected to the road system. Not because no one wants to connect them, but because Alaska's terrain simply doesn't negotiate, and that creates an unusual cultural outcome. People fly everywhere. Small planes land on gravel bars, frozen rivers, even on beaches when the tide is out. Aviation isn't a luxury here, it's daily transportation. Some Alaskans get their mail delivered by air, groceries by air, even medical help by air. This has shaped a flying culture unlike anything else in the United States. But this part of Alaska's story leads to something deeper that becomes clear later. Alaska's infrastructure challenges aren't just about geography, they're also about geology. This state sits on the boundary of the Pacific Plate, one of the most active tectonic zones on Earth. The 1964 earthquake, for example, reached magnitude 9.2, making it the strongest ever recorded in North America. Entire coastlines shifted by several meters, forests sank, and towns dropped below sea level in minutes. What this reveals is that Alaska didn't simply recover from these events. It adapted. The landscape absorbs change the way a living organism might, which is exactly why you'll find some of the world's fastest growing glaciers here, and surprisingly, some of the fastest shrinking ones too. This contrast often confuses visitors, but it makes sense when you know the temperature swings. Winter temperatures in the interior can drop to minus 50 degrees Celsius, which is around minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit, while summer in the same regions can climb to 30 degrees Celsius, or 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Few places on Earth experience such extremes in such short distances. Speaking of extremes, here's another detail that shapes daily life. Alaska has some of the most dramatic daylight variation in the world. In the far north, the sun can stay above the horizon for more than 2 months straight, while winter brings the opposite darkness for weeks at a time. But the interesting part, locals don't see this as strange. They build routines around it. Midnight baseball games without artificial lights, festivals during night that look like afternoon. And during winter, communities organize events specifically to keep morale high. Now, let's shift to wildlife, because this is where Alaska becomes even more unconventional. This state has more than 100,000 glaciers, but it also has the largest population of bald eagles in the world. Moose here can weigh 700 kilograms, nearly 1,500 pounds. And the number of bears, black, brown, and polar, combined, is estimated in the tens of thousands. But here's something few documentaries explain. Wildlife in Alaska isn't just abundant, it's predictable. Migration patterns follow almost mathematical precision. Salmon return to the same rivers with accuracy that still puzzles scientists. Caribou travel hundreds of kilometers, sometimes hundreds of miles in sweeping arcs that haven't changed for centuries. It's one of the few places where ancient animal behavior continues almost untouched. And one of the clearest examples of this predictable behavior is something we'll see later in the video. A moment where nature and survival unfold right in front of you. Here's a lesser-known curiosity. Alaska has one of the most unusual tax systems in the United States. There's no state income tax and no statewide sales tax, but many residents receive an annual payment called the Permanent Fund Dividend, which can range from hundreds to thousands of dollars depending on oil revenues. It's a reminder that Alaska's economy is built on resources, oil, minerals, fisheries, and that its relationship with the land is practical as much as it is emotional. But here's the part that brings all these threads together. Alaska is a place where extremes stack on top of each other. Vast distances, massive landscapes, dramatic daylight cycles, huge wildlife populations, powerful geology, and deep cultural history all in one region. And understanding these fundamentals makes every place you'll see next more meaningful. Because now, when we move into Alaska's most remarkable locations, the scale, the behavior, and the contrasts won't feel random anymore. They'll feel like pieces of a much bigger, more connected system. Glacier Bay is one of the few places on Earth where you can watch a landscape actively rearranging itself. The bay didn't even exist a few centuries ago. Ice once filled the entire area, stretching more than 100 kilometers, nearly 60 miles, from the mountains to the ocean. And what makes this place so interesting is how fast it changed. In just over 250 years, the glacier retreated more than 100 kilometers, creating the deep fjords, cliffs, and channels we see today. That's a rate of change almost unheard of for ice of this size. But here comes something most visitors don't notice: the sound. When a tidewater glacier calves, the crack can echo for kilometers, sometimes several miles. It's one of the clearest reminders that this place is still moving. And that movement becomes even more noticeable as the journey continues. The Juneau Icefield is one of the largest ice fields in North America. And what makes it unique is not just its size, but how it works. It stretches for more than 3,900 kilometers, roughly 1,500 square miles, feeding over 40 glaciers that flow like slow rivers of compressed snow. The Mendenhall Glacier is the most accessible of them, about 21 kilometers long, nearly 13 meters, and constantly reshaping the valley around it. One of the most interesting features here is the ice cave system that forms when meltwater carves tunnels beneath the glacier. These caves aren't permanent. They shift, collapse, and reform depending on temperature, sunlight, and seasonal flow. Visitors often focus on the glacier itself, but the surrounding landscape tells an even clearer story. You can see the timeline of retreat right on the ground. Fresh rock closest to the ice, low shrubs a little farther out, then young forest, and finally older mature trees. It's ecological succession in real time. And just as this landscape evolves step by step, the journey also moves into a place shaped by a very different kind of history. Sitka stands out in Alaska because it blends natural environment with layers of human history. For thousands of years, this was home to the Tlingit people, and you can still see their influence in totem poles, carving traditions, and community structures. Then the Russians arrived in the 1700s, establishing New Archangel, the capital of Russian America. That's why Sitka has a mix of indigenous, Russian, and American elements that rarely appear together anywhere else. One of the most interesting things about Sitka is its geography. The town sits on the outer coast facing the Pacific directly. That means stronger weather systems, heavier rainfall, and more exposed coastline compared to many other Alaskan towns. The nearby volcanic peaks, including Mount Edge, also create dramatic elevation changes right next to the ocean. Wildlife here reflects the location too. Sitka has an unusually dense bald eagle population, and the surrounding waters are rich in marine life, sea otters, seals, and migrating whales. It's a place where coastal ecosystems and island landscapes meet in a very compact area. And as the journey leaves this blend of cultures and coastline behind, it moves toward a region where the terrain begins to tighten and the rainforest becomes even more dominant. Ketchikan is known as the entrance to Alaska's Inside Passage, but what makes it truly interesting is its connection to rain. This area receives more than 3,800 millimeters of precipitation per year, around 150 inches, making it one of the wettest towns in the United States. That constant moisture is the reason the surrounding forest is classified as a temperate rainforest filled with massive cedar, spruce, and hemlock. The city is also home to one of the world's largest collections of standing totem poles. These poles aren't just decorative, they carry histories, family stories, and symbols tied to Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian culture. Many of the carving traditions seen here are still practiced today. And then there's Misty Fjords, a huge wilderness area just east of town. Steep granite walls rise more than 900 meters, nearly 3,000 feet above narrow inlets. The combination of cliffs, waterfalls, and dense forest makes the area feel remote even though it's close to a major port. Ketchikan is also one of the best places to observe salmon runs. Several streams run directly through town, and during peak season, the fish fill the water so densely that the surface seems to move. And from these narrow, rainy channels, the journey continues toward landscapes shaped by entirely different forces. Skagway became famous during the Klondike Gold Rush, when tens of thousands of prospectors arrived hoping to reach the Yukon. What makes this place especially interesting is how fast it changed. Within months, a small frontier settlement grew into a major supply hub, complete with shops, saloons, and a trail system carved directly into the mountains. The steep Chilkoot and White Pass routes were so demanding that many stampeders abandoned their plans before even leaving Alaska. One of the most notable engineering achievements here is the White Pass and Yukon Route Railway, completed in 1900. The line climbs from sea level up to nearly 900 meters, around 3,000 feet, using narrow-gauge tracks built into cliffs and ridge lines. It's considered one of the toughest railway projects ever attempted in North America. Skagway today preserves much of its Gold Rush-era layout, with wooden boardwalks and restored buildings that reflect what the town looked like more than a century ago. But just outside the historical district, the landscape changes quickly. Steep valleys, dense forest, and fast-moving weather systems shape the region far more than the old Gold Rush stories might suggest. And as the route continues, those natural elements begin to dominate even more. Valdez sits at the end of a deep fjord surrounded by some of the most dramatic terrain in south-central Alaska. The town receives heavy snowfall, often more than 7.5 meters, around 300 in each winter. That level of snow is partly responsible for the many waterfalls and steep avalanche paths that shape the area. It also makes Valdez one of the few places in Alaska where skiing and snow sports extend well into spring. The surrounding mountains hold several glaciers, including the massive Columbia Glacier, which has been retreating rapidly in recent decades. This glacier once filled much of the nearby inlet, but it has pulled back more than 20 kilometers, about 12 meters since the 1980s. Its retreat has changed local currents and even altered navigation routes. Despite the dramatic scenery, Valdez is also known for its port. It serves as the southern endpoint of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, meaning oil tankers depart from here year-round. This creates a rare contrast: a small coastal community with both a major industrial role and immediate access to remote wilderness. And as the journey moves on from this mix of mountains, glaciers, and coastline, the next region shifts toward open water and rugged coastlines influenced more by the Gulf of Alaska than by inland terrain. Seward is one of the most accessible coastal towns for observing Alaska's marine ecosystems up close. It sits on Resurrection Bay, a deep, narrow inlet that allows large marine mammals to approach surprisingly close to shore. Humpback whales, orcas, and sea lions frequently appear here, especially during summer when the bay fills with bait fish. One of the most interesting aspects of Seward is its proximity to varied habitats within a short distance. The bay descends to depths of more than 300 meters, nearly 1,000 feet, meaning cold, nutrient-rich water rises to the surface. This upwelling supports a rich food chain, which is why wildlife sightings are so common. At the same time, steep mountains rise directly behind the town, creating sharp weather changes when warm coastal air meets cooler mountain currents. Seward also has a long maritime history. It served as a major port during World War II, and after the 1964 earthquake damaged parts of the waterfront, many areas were rebuilt according to new safety standards that still shape the town's layout today. As the route continues, the landscape begins to open up again, shifting from steep bays and deep water toward a broader region where mountains, rivers, and coastline intersect in more gradual pattern. The Kenai Peninsula is often described as a compressed version of Alaska because so many ecosystems appear here in a relatively small area. You'll find fjords, mountains, dense forests, salmon rivers, and coastal wetlands, all within driving distance of each other. One of the most interesting features is the peninsula's salmon system. Several species return every year, creating migrations so large that some rivers can appear to be moving even when the water itself is still. These runs support everything from eagles to black bears and are a major part of local culture and subsistence living. The peninsula is also home to a significant stretch of the Harding ice field, which feeds numerous glaciers that flow outward toward the coast. Some of these glaciers have retreated enough to reveal new lakes and valleys, giving researchers the chance to study freshly exposed terrain. But what really sets this area apart is how quickly the terrain changes as you move along it. One section can feel coastal and mild, while another becomes cold and alpine within minutes. And as the landscape shifts once again, the journey continues toward an area where human history and natural geography meet in a more subtle way. Anchorage is Alaska's largest city, yet it sits right against a massive mountain range, the Chugachak Mountains, making it one of the few urban areas in the United States where wildlife regularly crosses into neighborhoods. Moose often walk down residential streets, and it's not unusual to see bald eagles perched on streetlights or beluga whales surfacing offshore. This overlap between city life and wilderness is one of the defining features of Anchorage. Another interesting detail is the city's location on a subduction zone. The ground beneath Anchorage is unusually complex, which is why the 1964 earthquake had such a dramatic impact here. The quake reshaped parts of the coastline, altered drainage patterns, and changed the long-term development of the city. Today, many areas are built with earthquake-resistant design in mind, a direct response to lessons learned from that event. Anchorage is also a logistical hub. Most goods entering Alaska pass through here, and the airport is one of the busiest cargo airports in the world due to its strategic position between North America and Asia. This makes Anchorage feel surprisingly international despite its remote location. And as the route moves away from this mix of urban activity and wilderness, the landscape begins to lean back towards smaller communities shaped more by mountains and open terrain. Talkeetna is a small town, but it's an important one, especially for mountaineering. Many climbers attempting North America's highest peaks gather here before heading into the mountains, and the town has developed a unique aviation culture because of it. Pilots routinely fly supplies, gear, and climbers into remote airstrips and glacier landing zones, navigating conditions that change quickly with altitude. One of the most interesting aspects of Talkeetna is its location at the meeting point of three major rivers, the Susitna, Chulitna, and Telkitna. These rivers drain massive sections of interior Alaska, carrying sediment, glacial meltwater, and seasonal runoff. This creates distinctive braided river patterns, complex networks of shifting channels that look almost geometric from the air. The town itself has preserved much of its early 20th century character. Historic buildings, small shops, and local lodges reflect the area's early aviation and railroad history. But despite the village-like atmosphere, the surrounding region offers sweeping views of some of Alaska's largest peaks. The weather here can shift rapidly, which is why aviation forecasts are treated almost like daily essentials. And as the journey leaves this small but strategically important hub behind, the next stretch of landscape becomes far more remote, rugged, and defined by distances rather than towns. Denali National Park covers a vast section of Alaska's interior, but what defines it most is scale. The park spans more than 24,000 square kilometers, nearly 9,400 square miles. And at its center stands Denali, the tallest mountain in North America, at 6,190 meters, or 20,310 feet. One thing visitors often don't expect is how rarely the peak is fully visible. Because of its height, Denali creates its own weather systems, producing clouds that can hide the summit even on otherwise clear days. But the mountain isn't the only reason this place matters. Denali is one of the few regions in the U.S. where large mammals still follow ancient migration and feeding patterns with almost no interruption. Caribou herds move across the tundra in wide arcs. Wolves maintain large territories, and grizzly bears dig for roots on open slopes during summer. Many of these behaviors haven't changed for centuries, offering a rare look at ecosystems that still function naturally. Another interesting aspect is the park's single road. Only one main route cuts through the landscape, and most of it is closed to private vehicles. This design wasn't accidental. It's meant to reduce human impact on wildlife. And as the terrain stretches further north, human presence becomes even sparser, giving way to a region shaped more by seasons than by infrastructure. Fairbanks sits near the center of Alaska, where the interior climate shows its full extremes. Winter temperatures can drop below -40 degrees Celsius, around -40 degrees Fahrenheit, while summer can reach 30 degrees Celsius, close to 86 degrees Fahrenheit. These shifts create a unique environment where permafrost, boreal forest, and river valleys all intersect. One of the most interesting scientific features near Fairbanks is the permafrost tunnel system. Researchers study frozen ground that holds sediment, ice wedges, and even ancient plant material preserved for tens of thousands of years. The city also experiences some of the most dramatic daylight variations in the state. In mid-winter, daylight lasts only a few hours, while midsummer brings more than 21 hours of sunlight. This makes Fairbanks one of the best places for observing the aurora borealis, especially during months when the skies are clear and temperatures are low enough to reduce atmospheric moisture. Fairbanks is also deeply connected to Alaska's transportation history. Early traders and miners relied on the river system and later the railroad to move supplies across the interior. Today, the city remains a hub for research, logistics, and tourism. And as the route continues northward, the environment begins to shift again. Trees thin out, temperatures drop further, and the landscape stretches into one of the most remote corridors in the entire state. The Dalton Highway is one of the most isolated roads in North America. Stretching about 667 kilometers or 414 miles, it was originally built to support the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. What makes this road especially interesting is how quickly conditions can change. Drivers can move from paved surfaces to gravel to snow-covered stretches all within a short distance. Service points are extremely limited, which is why travelers must bring fuel, supplies, and emergency gear. The Brooks Range adds another layer to this region. These mountains extend more than 1,100 kilometers, roughly 700 meters, across northern Alaska, forming a barrier between the boreal forest and the Arctic tundra. The range influences weather patterns, wildlife migrations, and even vegetation boundaries. Caribou herds cross these mountains during seasonal migrations, sometimes forming lines that stretch for kilometers. Winter here brings temperatures that can fall below -50 degrees Celsius or -58 degrees Fahrenheit, and wind strong enough to reshape snow into hard, sculpted drifts. Yet the area remains crucial for studying Arctic ecosystems, especially the transition zones where forest gives way to tundra. And beyond these mountains, the landscape opens into regions where the balance between predator and prey becomes even more visible, setting the stage for one of the most striking wildlife moments in all of Alaska. Brooks Falls is one of the clearest examples of how predictable and ancient Alaska's wildlife patterns can be. Every summer, salmon return to the Brooks River with timing so consistent that biologists can estimate their arrival almost down to the week. The falls create a natural choke point, forcing the fish to jump through a narrow channel. That single geological feature is the reason this place has become one of the most recognizable wildlife sites in North America. What most people don't realize is how structured the bear activity here actually is. Larger, more dominant brown bears position themselves directly at the top of the falls, where their chances of catching salmon are highest. Younger or less experienced bears stay downstream where competition is lower, but the rewards are also smaller. This creates a natural hierarchy that's easy to observe and requires no human interference. And leaving this river behind, one thing becomes clear. Alaska's landscapes aren't just scenic, they're interconnected systems that still operate with very little interruption. Alaska stands apart because everything here still works on its own terms. Its mountains, its wildlife, its seasons, even its history. Each place we've seen is part of a larger system shaped by distance, climate, and time. And understanding those pieces makes the entire region feel different. And whether it's a glacier reshaping a valley or a bear waiting at a river, Alaska shows moments that are difficult to find anywhere else. If you enjoyed exploring this part of the world, there's much more ahead. Each place tells its own story, and the next one might surprise you even more.